So dear learner, welcome to our continuing lessons. I'm delighted to welcome you to the manifested learning platform. And we are continuing with our human resource management subject. And today we are going to look at the separation strategy. And the lesson for today, we are looking at the separation process. Employee separation, dear learner, is the activity of ensuring that an employee who quits the organization is exited in a structured and orderly manner. This is very crucial, structured and orderly manner. As you are aware, in almost all life scenarios, entry is normally very exciting. Exit sometimes has challenges. So as a human resource practitioner, as a manager or as an employee, you will go through this, or you have gone through this at one point or the other. And that's why it's very imperative that those who handle human resource issues are well versed with how to manage the separation process so that it is a mutual and an agreeable setting for the employee, the employer, and other stakeholders. So we are saying that the employee separation is the process, is the activity or the process of ensuring that an employee who quits an organization is exited from that particular organization in a structured and orderly manner. And we are going to look at two aspects of the separation process, and we are going to start with the steps in the separation process. Steps in the separation process. Process. Now, dear learner, these steps in the separation process will depend on the organizational policy in terms of how the organization handles the separation process, and also will depend on the ways through which an employee is leaving an organization. And the steps for an employee who is leaving through a redundancy, the steps of an employee who is leaving through maybe retirement, the steps may be varied somehow, but the first one is normally to identify and document the issues. So the first step is identification and documentation of issues. Identification and documentation of issues. So in human resource management, that trail of documents is very important, because the decision to separate an employee from an organization sometimes may also go the legal way, where an employee might argue the separation has not been done properly. So it is important, dear learner, that if it is envisaged that separation may occur, then, for example, if it is about the poor performance of a worker, then that poor performance of that employee should be documented, and issues put together, and intervention measures, for example, tried, so that when it comes to termination, all these could have been documented. So the first step is, as a practitioner, identify the issues, document those issues very well, put them on file so that they can inform decision making. Then coaching employees to rectify the issues. Coaching employees to rectify the issues. So for example, we have just talked about performance. So supposing an employee's performance is not at par with what is expected, then the supervisor should sit down with that employee, bring out this to the employee that this is the expected standard of performance, and these are the things you need to do. So that employee is coached so that it is possible to indicate that performance has not been very well, yes. This has been documented, yes. This employee has been informed, the employee has been provided with what is required, and this employee has been requested to be able to improve their performance. Then the third stage, after the first stage has been looked at, the second stage has been looked at, then the third stage is creating a performance management plan. Number 3, creation of a performance management plan. Creation of a performance management plan. You have now identified the issues. The employee has been coached and the employee has been told your performance is going to be monitored for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 9 months. So the creation of that performance management plan becomes important to see whether the employee is improving, and the employee is informed. If the employee doesn't improve, the performance contract can, for example, be terminated. Then number 4, termination of employment. Termination of employment. So issues have been identified, they have been documented, coaching has taken place, an employee has been told to rectify the issues, an agreement plan has been put in place, and still that particular desired improvement is not being achieved or arrived at by the employee. Then the next stage is to terminate the employment of that particular employee with the employer. So termination of the employment contract comes in, you can see, dear learner, at stage number 4, when the others have not yielded, for example, any positive return. Then number 5, conducting an exit interview. Conducting an exit interview. So the exit interview could be conducted once the employee has been informed. Now your contract of employment has been terminated, and a situation is set where the employee is required to provide some feedback. The employer is also supposed to communicate to that particular employee. And when it comes to the process of exit interview, we shall be shortly be looking at what is an exit interview and what is supposed to be done within that particular exit interview in our subsequent lessons, and what should be done, what are the things to be addressed in an exit interview. But an exit interview in brief is a session that is created to be able to communicate to the employee who is leaving, and also to be able to get some feedback and some clarifications. We shall be looking at that in our subsequent lessons. So these are the steps in the separation process, and they will vary from separation to separation, and each case has to be dealt with on the basis of each case. And that's what you are saying. The separation must be handled on the merit of each separation case that is taking place within a given work environment. So these are the steps that may be considered in a separation process. Then how about the factors to consider? Factors to consider in separation process. Factors to consider in separation process. Factors to consider in separation process. So when you are conducting a separation process, dear learner, it is very critical that you put certain factors into consideration. And before the separation is done, an organization must be aware that an employee can challenge this particular separation process or this separation activity in a court of law. And that's why an organization has to move very systematically to ensure that a separation process is done in the right way possible for the win-win situation for the organization and also for the employee. Now, one of the first things that must be considered before a separation takes place is the justification. Number 1, justification for a separation. Sometimes there might be a feeling that a particular employee has to leave an organization. But if an employee has a contract of service, an employee has a contract of engagement, or an employee has not performed well maybe for the first time, should that be a reason to terminate the services of that particular employee? So this should be considered. And then there is also the employment contract. Employment contract. So this is very critical, dear learner. This is very critical. In the relationship between the employer and the employee, there is an employment contract. So the question is, what does the employment contract say about the separation? So that is very critical to be considered. Then specific procedures for separation. 3 specific procedures for separation. Specific procedures for separation. So every contract of employment, no two contracts are the same. 2 employees could be employed on the same day, but one employee, depending on the level, if as a supervisor, it may, for example, require that that supervisor gives 3 months notice, or the employer gives 3 months notice prior to the separation. So now, if it is a requirement that that should be the case, then the procedure to be followed in relation to that particular employment contract is a very important factor that should be considered to ensure the separation is done based on the specific procedures of separation that that employer and employee have agreed. Then the legal implications of the separation. Legal implications of the separation. Legal implications of the separation. Now, for example, an employee may claim that this separation is unfair. Maybe dismissal, for example. Unfair dismissal. So the law provides for what can be an unfair dismissal. So it is important that before any separation is done, an organization seeks some legal interpretation of the separation so that the separation is done within the legal framework. So the legal implications of the separation must be considered, otherwise the employer may have to pay very heavily for a separation process. Then the behavior of an employee. The behavior of an employee. The behavior of an employee regarding separation. So, dear learner, it's also important that if you are ever involved in the separation process of an organization, you try to anticipate how the employee is likely to behave during this particular separation process. And if it is envisaged that the employee could, for instance, be violent, then this separation process should be done in the context of maybe the security department representatives there, so that if the employee becomes violent at the separation, say interview and so on, measures can be taken to ensure that the employee and maybe the employer's representatives are also free from risk and harm and so on. Then handling of, there is also the element of communication. Communication of the separation decision. So that should also be considered. How should the decision to separate be communicated? The communication, should it be in a meeting? Should it be online? Should it be face-to-face communication of separation decision? So that should also be considered when determining or deciding to carry out a separation. Then handling of the final exit. Handling of the final exit. Handling of the final exit. So an organization has to consider, if it is a senior manager, who should handle the final exit. Maybe the board chair, If it is maybe a head of a department, maybe the CEO. If maybe it is a supervisor, maybe the manager or the human resource department. So that again must be considered very effectively to ensure that an organization handles the separation process effectively. So dear learner, this is one of the areas that are very emotive and very emotional in the human resource management process, but somehow it has to be handled, because at one point or the other, we have seen that an employee may have to leave an organization, maybe they are resigning, they are being dismissed, they are being declared redundant, or the workers are separating due to maybe involuntary means and so on. So these will have to be handled, and we have indicated that it has to be handled in a structured and orderly manner. So in our lesson today, dear learner, we have been looking at the separation process under the separation strategy topic, and in our lesson today, we have looked at what is meant by the separation process, and we have indicated that employee separation process is the activity of ensuring that an employee who quits the organization is exited from the organization in a structured and orderly manner. And we have gone ahead and looked at two aspects, that is the steps in the separation process and also the factors to consider in separation process. And we have said that in the steps in the separation process, they may include: 1, identification and documentation of issues. Number 2, coaching employees to rectify the issues. Number 3, creation of a performance management plan in an organization. Then number 4, termination of employment. And number 5, conducting an exit interview. So those are the steps that may be taken in the separation process, and we have indicated that it will vary from a case to case. Then we have again looked at the factors to consider in the separation process, and we have indicated, dear learner, that number 1, justification for separation has to be considered. The employment contract has to be considered. Number 2, and number 3, specific procedures for separation of employees have to be considered. Then number 4, legal implications of the separation have to be considered. Then number 5, the behavior of an employee regarding separation have to be considered. And we have indicated, learner, that if you are the manager conducting the separation process or the supervisor, you have to be very keen, because an employee could become violent at this level. Then number 6, communication of the separation decision, that has also to be considered. And number 7, handling of the final exit. So dear learner, as we come to the end of our lesson, it is important to note that the separation process is a very emotive process, and it still has to be done, and those handling it have to do it in such a way that it is structured and orderly, so that it is communicated effectively. So your assignment for the lesson today, your assignment, discuss the factors that should be considered discuss the factors that should be considered in managing the separation process in an organization. So dear learner, your assignment for today, discuss the factors that should be considered in managing the separation process in an organization. So learner, we have come to the end of our lesson today, which was the separation process, where we have looked at the steps in the separation process, factors to consider in the separation process, and an assignment which is discuss the factors that should be considered in managing the separation process in an organization. So Thank you very much, dear learner, for being active in our lesson today.